Welcome to a guest episode of the NERO Show presented by Join Cycling.
Today we've got Dem Berg. He's actually the CEO and founder of Join Cycling. He chats us through some of the secrets behind the fastest ever hour record attempts.
Jim coaches a number of World Tour pros, so we go through what their calendar looks like and how he sets out their training.
Right, then we've got some strength training chat, how many pros are actually doing it, and has pro cycling actually gotten safer or more dangerous? All right, let's get into it. Jim, so you are the founder of Join Cycling, but I think you also mentioned you still personally coach some World Tour riders. Who do you still coach, or have recently coached, I guess?
Yeah, at the moment, Sam Omen, rider from Trek, and Taco van der Hoorn.
So we're recording this is December, so I'm guessing you've probably already planned at least the first part of their season because they would have started training. How do you actually do that? You sit down, you're coaching a World Tour rider, they're going to do Paris-Roubaix. What do you actually, that's a lot of pressure, first off, as a coach. How do you actually do that?
Yeah, well, first of all, it kind of depends if you're working with someone which you haven't worked before, or if it's like a second or third season, because it all starts with evaluating it properly. Like, okay, what did we do like last year? What worked? What didn't? What do we actually like in the way we communicate, for example, in the way we work? Because that can be completely different between riders. Some guys like to call every day. Others want to be left alone, or just want to, or left alone, but want to, know their plan way in advance. And others are more like, okay, I want it more based on how I'm feeling today. So that's completely different. So it's all started with an evaluation basically. And then in December, most pro teams came together already, and they had like a chat with like the director sportif. There's like this manager within the team, or your personal coach within the team, kind of like your liaison there. And then there's some kind of rough outline how your season will look like. But Pogacar knows exactly what races he will gonna attend to next year.
All of them. Basically, does the whole season.
Yeah, exactly. Just write them all. But I mean, even a guy like, I don't know, Kampenaerts, he probably knows he's on a long list for the Tour, but he's not that secure of a Tour spot, for example, and that's something you really need to take into account because, well, let's take Sam Omen, for example. He kind of knows to which Grand Tour he goes, but if he doesn't, he would like to do that other Grand Tour, and then everything changes, So there's not that much. For example, if you already know, you're probably going to do the Giro, but there's this long list of 10 riders, so you might not end up with Giro, then it's like, okay, but then I definitely want to do the Vuelta, for example. And that's... So... Don't think that every pro rider has it like completely set out the whole entire season. That being said, of course, especially also a rider like Taco van der Hoorn, the team knows where his skill set lies, what he's good at. So he will know his role in the big classics, in the spring season, and he can like adjust the plan according to that. And well, in case of Taco, what we did, for example, the previous years, what worked really well is doing Tour Down Under and not doing like so basically most World Tour teams have like their training camp right now, or they're basically leaving like next week. And then they stay there somewhere, probably in Spain, up until like Christmas. Just before Christmas, they all got home, and then there's a new training camp in January. But of course, the part of the team that goes to Down Under doesn't attend to the January training camp, and then is Taco's case, for example, he tries to get in Australia a bit earlier, like during New Year's Eve. And then from Australia going to Colombia on altitude camp for a long period. And then getting back right before Omloop Kuurne. And with right before, literally mean like the day before getting back. So you don't get like that high altitude dip in that weekend. And that worked. There's a kind of risk there, but it worked really well for a couple of seasons.
I think one thing amateurs often struggle with in terms of season planning is the idea between a pro who would run a season, and let's say after they do their pre-season, they go to Tour Down Under. Let's say they're sort of quote unquote in shape from maybe February to September would be a season, maybe. How much would a pro rider's fitness fluctuate within that whole season? Because this idea that I peaked for Paris-Roubaix. Well, does that mean you're getting dropped in an hour, 2 months later? What's the variance across that season like that?
That's actually a pretty good question. I mean, like 20 years ago, World Tour riders peaked, but that was basically where the doping program peaked. It's not like that anymore. If you want to be really good in Paris-Roubaix, you're basically good in that period of the classic season, like those 3 or 4 weeks at the end of the classic season. So you don't want to be like too good already, like in Kuurne or Omloop, but basically 3 or 4 weeks after that, like half March, you really need to feel like, okay, I'm getting there, because then in 3 weeks time you have like Flanders and Paris-Roubaix. And that's basically how it works. So, for example, in Taco's case, what we're trying to do here is not to ride like all these like Murcia, Spain, Portugal kind of like races already beginning of February, or like Mallorca in January. There's actually quite a big gap between Tour Down Under and the first like big opening weekend in Belgium. And then at the first opening weekend in Belgium, he doesn't need to be like at his 100% top, but it doesn't fluctuate that much anymore until like the period that he really wants to be good. So indeed, good point. It doesn't fluctuate that much during the season anymore. Like Jan Ulrich could do like his intervals in Dauphiné, and then in 3 weeks' time he had to be pretty good in the Tour. It doesn't work like that anymore.
Sorry, just on that, I know this is really difficult to do, but like for an amateur to maybe visualize, could you try and maybe, if you took FTP as a number, maybe give a bracket? Like what bracket would he be fluctuating? Is it like from 430 to like 390 2 months later, or is he within like a 15 watt bracket?
Maybe 10.
Okay.
Maybe 10. But the thing is,
yeah.
His FTP is probably higher, actually. If like in the beginning of that classic period, and then fatigue kicks in, but fatigue resistance gets better,
Mm-hmm.
So his aerobic threshold, his metabolism, even like his lactate shuttling, recovering from these short, like 1-2 minutes, really intense bouts of racing, that gets all better, and then his FTP will probably get like it's not like it's decreasing, but it gets like kind of like there's a limiter there, because like the fatigue gets bigger, but the fatigue resistance get better basically. So like what he can do on 80 or 90% of his FTP in a 6th hour, that improves.
Once he's into the rigors of that, opening weekend started, Paris-Roubaix is the goal, but you're in that kind of 3 to 4 week phase. Is he logging in to join cycling on a Monday after the race and sees, I've got VO2s tomorrow? Or like, how are you managing? Because as you said, like he's racing on the weekends. It might be a midweek race. How are you as a coach? Like, what are his sessions look like?
There are in the classic season, there are of course some midweek races as well, and you don't want to do them like every week, because then there's basically no time to do any proper structured intervals or reckons, for example. You want to do a lot of course reckons as well. Actually, if there are midway races, then your job as a coach is not about training plans. It's basically about, how did the last race went? How do you feel? What are you missing? What do you think you're really confident about? Those are like, or just having a conversation, because you're also like pro riders. They're especially like in those periods of time, they're always with the same bunch. So talking to someone else outside of that bunch is often really like, almost therapeutic, basically. So that's kind of your role as a coach. I think and that's important, but in terms of like, I've studied human movement sciences, and I'm into training and into planning and that sort of stuff, but don't estimate the importance of that during that period, because the emphasis on those things really lies in, like, for example, altitude camps, the macro planning over the season, talking with coaches of the team. That's like, so especially like, for example, in this period in time, my job is more important than when he's actually racing.
Just a quick break to talk about Join Cycling for a second, because obviously Jim is the founder of Join Cycling, who have come on to support the NERO show this year. So, Chris, what's Join Cycling about?
Join Cycling is an AI-based cycling app, Jesse, and it is super simple. The whole idea here is to try and get people who are thinking about structured training, haven't tried any structured training. This is the easiest way to get into that form of training.
Download the app, pick a goal, connect your Garmin or your Wahoo or head, and you can be straight in, ticking sessions off, working towards your goal. And the big thing about Join is how it updates for your availability. Put in your group rides, put in the days you're busy at work and you can't train. It'll adapt the training around that to get you started towards the cycling goals.
Now, if you do want to try it, head over to join.cc/NERO show, and you can do a sign up for 1 month as opposed to the normal 7 days, and you don't actually need a credit card to sign up. So go ahead, start ripping into some sessions, and a big thanks to Join Cycling.
The whole idea of like running a season, and I know people in the US will probably do that just, or Europe as well, because of the weather and naturally have that seasonality. Do you think that's, weather aside, do you think that's an optimal way for like a club rider to improve, or should they be maybe having more peaks and troughs throughout a year? Like how should they consider their season compared to a pro?
Yeah, no, I think for an amateur rider, I mean, the real gains come from like riding your bike 12 months a year, which I wouldn't say that you need to ride like every month, like the equal volume and intensity. But most amateur cyclists have like this big goal in April, and then maybe one in July or August, and that's about it, So they basically train as a monk in like February, March, towards April. Then they're like, okay, I might be missing something, and then okay, let's give it another push in May. And then for a lot of guys, already beginning of July, by the way, it's kind of like, okay, I'm not completely done with this sport. Let's do something else for the next 6 months. And I think, there's I mean, it makes sense because there's not that much, like especially in Europe. Yeah, what kind of goal are you going to set like in, I don't know, November or December? But actually, like if you look, for example, at amateur runners, they often can set like a marathon goal in April, and they can set one in October. That periodization is way better. Every half a year you have something to go for. And with cycling, because of seasonality, because of the weather, you don't naturally have that.
Yeah, so would you say like, the solution of that, what you said, which was sort of, let's say like May to July, would you say it would be better to, let's say someone in that case, would your solution be stretch that out and go March to September like a pro, or go, okay, I'm going to have a peak I'm going to train up for early, like for February, and then again in September, like should they do a season, or pretend like there is no season almost and just have different, repeating goals every 6 months? Does that make sense? What I'm kind of getting at?
Yeah, I kind of get what you're heading towards. I think like don't look at a pro calendar and act like there is no season. There's only like this next goal in 6 months' time or something. I think that will be, and we're talking about amateur riders that ride cyclos, right? Grand Fondos. You're not amateur riders that do races. Then they have like way more. Then they're also like stuck to the race calendar that your federation kind of like puts on you instead of the other way around. But I think like in general, like for normal like amateur cyclists, it would make way more sense to just think about like, okay, cycling is just something I love to do, and there is basically no season. There's just a calendar year, and I set these goals every like 5 or 6 months or so, or maybe, I mean, then in 12 months time, maybe you can have even like 3 goals, like every 4 or 5 months ago or so, But and the same actually goes for like, I mean, the pro cycling season for a team starts basically beginning of January and it ends at the end of October. I mean, of course, then some people look at, there was this, the Tour of the Netherlands, half of October. Then, of course, okay, yeah, that's not a big goal of Pogacar. But there's still like 10 or 15 pro riders, like really high-level pro riders that think like, hey, this is like a serious pro race that I might be able to, ride a proper GC or win a stage and then make a goal out of it, you know? And the same goes for Tour Down Under. I mean, there will be... I think, I don't know, Van Eetveld, for example, you know, a guy from Lotto, he will probably make Down Under a big goal for him, which makes sense. So, and what I'm saying, like, and he makes probably 3 of those big goals during the season, and then he will have a pretty long season. And in between, of course, he sometimes like takes off a bit, you know, having a week of rest, then going back on an altitude camp. That's kind of like the normal rhythm, you know, big goal, rest week, altitude camp, and then work towards your next big goal.
I think indoor cycling's changed this a lot because I coach a few riders and their winter now has become a whole other part of the season, which is their indoor racing. Like they'll do that My Whoosh have that Sunday race club. So they'll do, these are people that are doing their road season, and you still have to work in some weeks off and some slight off-season breaks. But then it's not, oh, I'm base training for the next 5 months to then see what shape I get into. They're having a whole separate season all through winter. And I actually think that generally, for a lot of people that aren't a pro, that still have like 6 different levels to step through, condensing a season across winter is a good use of time as opposed to doing this sort of base training thing, which for a lot of people, they don't have enough time to clock up volume or mentally they burn out and they don't really make a lot of progress in that.
Yeah, I always looked at it like the whole idea around base training in the winter months, that basically came from like when it's 5 degrees Celsius outside and the road is wet, then doing like high intensity intervals and, you know, get sweaty, get even like and getting like your body temperature down. Yeah, that's not a proper way to prepare for the season, and therefore they thought like, okay, just keep it on a low intensity. But now, of course, with indoor training, yeah, that's not necessary anymore. You can do whatever HIIT session you like, and now people get it. Like, okay, if I don't do any HIIT sessions 4 months during the winter months, then I basically start at 0 again at the beginning of the season or at the beginning of when I want to do my high intensity intervals. So people now get it like, okay, I really need to keep doing those high intensity intervals as well during the winter months. And indoor, racing as well is a great tool for doing that.
You mentioned altitude camps a few times. For someone like Taco Van Horn or the pros you coach, how much of their improvement is centered around these specific camps versus how much is just the overall training across the season?
Well, it all comes down, of course, on consistency. And I mean, the thing is, the pro peloton, especially somewhere as of like 2019, 2020, went basically faster every year. So if you don't improve year over year as a pro cyclist, you're basically out of the pro peloton. So his biggest gains come from the consistency, being a pro, year over year, getting better. And not only, by the way, in training or physiology, but also gear, clothing, you know, everything, seasonal planning. And the altitude camps are like, I mean, there was that thing, I believe it was like in 15 or 2016, like Sky went on an altitude camp with their classic riders, and that was kind of like unheard of back then. Nowadays, it's kind of like, you can't imagine, pro cyclists working towards a big goal and not going on an altitude camp.
So they still do that. So a classics rider on a classics focus team, they're pretty much all doing altitude camps still?
Yeah, well, most of them are. I mean, I know that Van der Poel, he does a lot of altitude hotel stays. There's that hotel where they're staying with their team, and then he can train at sea level, and he really likes that. I do think often if you if you take guys like, if you take the extraterrestrials and look at their planning and how they do it, then that there's not a lot of lessons learned there, you know? I mean, they can just do whatever they like and get better anyway. Although you see that with Mathieu van der Poel, of course, since he lives in Spain and he got more focused and less distractions, he improved a lot over like the last 2 years. But so that's always difficult. But yeah, if you don't have that, if you didn't fell into a pot of talent when you were young, but you're still quite decent pro rider, then doing altitude camps is it's pretty important in my opinion.
Can I just come back to the amateur punter side of it for a second? You guys were talking about like season goals and that sort of stuff. Jesse and I know a lot of people. I'm sure you probably coach a few, Jesse, but it's the social ride, it's the fast-paced group ride. Like that is what matters. And it's pretty constant. Like it can be 12 months of the year. So I just sort of wondered, just in terms of like a training style or a training adjustment for an amateur who cares more about the weekly group ride than the sort of big result.
Yeah. Is that a problem, for example? No, I don't think. Not at all. Like, in that case, I mean that because the whole thing, what I just mentioned about consistency, the only way of actually keeping it fun and motivating for yourself is actually making those rides, if they're important to you, making them kind of like sacred during the week, and then plan the rest around it. And not to try to sell joint too much here, but I am doing this. I mean, that's also what we try to do with the joint cycling app, that if you want to hop on a group ride, you can just let the app know, and then the rest of the sessions will be planned around it accordingly. And then you can already, you probably know well in advance, like, okay, that guy is showing up, so we probably hit it off from the first mile. Or, like, okay, it will be pretty easy one. And then you kind of like, you can let that know to the app, and then everything plans around it. And if that's the way for you to train 52 weeks a year and 12 months a year, keeping a certain rhythm, then, don't go against it with your training plan, but really make that a vital part of your training plan.
Would you still periodize that? So how would Join periodize that? Or because otherwise you could just do the same week for 52 weeks a year.
Good question. Well, the thing is, if this endurance ride is really like, or if this social ride is really like just a big endurance ride, and for example, you could do some efforts, maybe on some climbs, maybe some echelons, I don't know, depending on where you live probably. Or maybe you can do some sprints, for example, off the back. Then there's still some possibilities there. But so I don't think with a social ride, doing this big endurance ride every week, that's kind of like an essential ingredient of your training plan anyway. But if it's like, hey, I want to do like 3 indoor races every week, that might become a problem to do that every week. Then we would like to periodize that a bit. Then we would like to say like, okay, hey, there's this 2 or 3 weeks now where we do a bit more racing, but then let's also do like 2 weeks where we focus a bit on other stuff. Otherwise, you just wear yourself out basically.
Jim's in Holland when he's talking about social echelon rides, Jesse. It's just, I love that.
That's what we're trying to do here.
Just socially, I'm in the gutter. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, when you show up at a certain group, you kind of know like, okay, this is probably what it will look like. And over here, you have a couple of those social echelon rides, which are pretty fun. But it might be a bit much, especially once you start doing them maybe twice a week. That might become a problem. Then if you also have other goals and you want to improve there, then you need to periodize there a bit.
You've obviously spent a lot of time not just coaching pros, but with the RX attempts, you've been around them, trained with them, spent time with them when they're at their training camps and stuff like that. Like, do you have any anecdotes or what's it like being around a good pro day to day when they're training? Is there anything that would like surprise people?
They're pretty boring, probably. I mean, yeah, especially altitude camps. That's just eat, train, sleep. If you can't stand that, that's actually a pretty important quality of a pro rider. Like Taco van der Hoorn is a guy you can put him up a mountain for 4 weeks all by himself with a bike, and he'll be fine. And there are not a lot of people fit for that. So there is like that's often underestimated in my opinion. Like there are a lot of amateur riders. I think it's pretty easy, for example, to do what you need to do for pro cycling. It's way harder to leave stuff out. That's the hard part, Don't go into that social thing, or even like, I need to go there, but it's a 45-minute drive, and I can also lay on the couch. Then choosing for laying on the couch, that's and you were already lying there for a couple of weeks, and you're only eating and sleeping and training and not talking to a lot of people. And that part, like leaving stuff out, that's the hard part, in my opinion. And even if we look at Pogacar, for example, he looks like a fun, entertaining guy in interviews and everything. But I've been around him in the hotel back in the Worlds, for example, at Wollongong. We're staying at the same hotel, and I mean, you kind of see how he was a bit younger back then, but you see how he behaves, how he acts, he doesn't. I mean, the lights go out pretty early. Let's put it like that. It's just you need to be like 100% mentally focused on that game, and not for a couple of weeks, but actually 12 months a year. Then just after the season, there's some time to relax a bit.
Are Taco van Hoorn or Sam Oomen doing strength training?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Year round?
Yeah, both. Taco year round. No, some also year round, but Taco likes to do like two strength sessions year round, with some a bit less at a certain point.
Is that different? Is that changed a lot? Were riders doing that back in 2015?
There were riders maybe doing it, but you had to like, there's a saying in Dutch, talk like brugman, which basically means that you need to really persuade someone in getting him or her in strength training. And nowadays it's not like that anymore. Nowadays, actually, same goes for with some. We did a bit more on running, for example. I wanted to make him like more dynamic, more versatile. He's already a pro rider for a pretty long time. He was like 10th in the Giro in 2018, for example. Now he's been around the block for a long time. And what you see with guys like Sam, that you get over the years, you get a bit less like dynamic, versatile. You kind of like in this same pattern or rhythm. And then especially doing strength training, but also some running, for example, or incorporating some other sports that can help.
Just to clarify, for both of them, we're talking heavy, in the gym, 5 to 10 reps, like proper resistance training for both?
It all ends up to like 3 to 5 reps, actually. Really like strength training. That's because the problem with strength training is that in the end, that's the only thing that works. Like that strength resistance thing around like 20 or 25 reps. Yeah, that's something, you need to get a hang of it first. So you need to do that first. Don't get me wrong here. With 2 or 3 sets. But then it needs to lead up to this, let's say 5 reps, where it's really resistance training. Then you need to take into account, like, okay, how much of that do we want? Because it can like limit the aerobic threshold a bit, like your metabolism, your glycolytic system can be like a bit limited if you do too much. And that's then depending on what kind of rider you are, of course. I mean, in the end, Taco van der Hoorn will never win a bunch sprint. That's not his role.
Yeah, I was good. That was going to be my next question. If you say take the pro peloton, and I do have a follow-up question about how they manage it around racing, but just firstly, like, again, tough question. Roughly what % do some kind of year-round heavy strength training?
These are always difficult questions to answer, because you're working with a couple of riders, and of course, a rider comes from a certain team, and you kind of know what they're doing there, or what kind of like coaches are into it, and which aren't. But I mean, there aren't, like, in terms of that's also always my thing with why don't you show power on Strava, for example, as a pro rider. There are not that many like secrets. There's not like there's this magic toolbox that a certain coach can has those ingredients, and the rest of the world doesn't know that. I mean, it's not. It would be cool if it works like that, but it doesn't. So I think most people nowadays are pretty familiar with that, and then there you have the stubborn ones. Let's say 80%. 80% does at least strength training in this season, but probably maybe I mean, that's okay. If you go on the Tour de France, you're 1 month off, right? You're because you need to be there 1 week in advance, and a 3-week tour. Basically, if you do 2 Grand Tours a year, for example, then you basically already are not doing 2 months of strength training, right? And maybe after the season you want to spend some time off. Well, then you're left with only 9 months of doing strength training. So let's say that 8 to 9 months of strength training, where at least they do it like once a week. I think most riders are in that.
Does that surprise you, Chris? It's higher than I thought. I thought maybe like 80% would do some in the winter, and then it gets to January and they don't bother. I'm kind of impressed that it's been adopted that well.
I'm not that surprised. It's funny. I was kind of thinking in a different realm. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I kind of feel like it's easier for a pro to fit strength training into their program than an amateur, because often, obviously they've got the time and the powers of recovery and the tools of recovery around them. Whereas to convince an amateur racer to fit 2 sessions in a week, it's bloody hard logistically, because often it means dropping a day of riding or dropping a recovery day. Oh shit, I have to do the strength training on a recovery day now. Oh shit, yeah. So anyway, that was kind of more. So I'm not particularly surprised that 80% of pros are doing it.
No, for sure. I mean, even on training camps, there's a gym in the hotel, and there's this session between up until 3. You do a lunch, you do a nap on your bed, and then you do another session in the gym, for example. And even if, for example, Taco goes on a altitude camp in Colombia, we will make sure there's a gym really like next to it, basically, where you can easily like just hop in. So it's, indeed, for pro riders, that's. And most of them, by the way, have like a squat tool. How do you say that in English? Rack in their shed or in their basement. Well, a lot of them have that, and that's the thing also with cycling. You don't need to do that many. You don't need to have like 25 pieces of equipment. Strength training for cycling is pretty easy. The movement is not that difficult.
I think this is just a self-explanatory one. Just how a pro would fit strength training around racing. Is it just when you're home, you do it? If there's a hotel at the gym, you do it, and if you can't do it for a week, you just don't bother. Like how is that worked in?
If you do it consistently throughout the year, you can easily. I knew like there are sprinters. Theo Bos, for example, was one that did like heavy strength training just the day before a race, and he would still win a sprint. Of course, I wouldn't say that's like the best approach for every rider, but I do think like there are a lot of amateur riders that only do strength training in the winter, and they're like, how the F does a pro rider does this when he also need to do races? But yeah, that's the thing. If you only do it like 3 months a year, then you're crushed every time, especially the first couple of weeks. But if you get the hang of it and you do it basically year round, then you can do it on a Thursday if you have a race on Saturday. I mean, you also want to put some tension on the legs on a Friday if you want to do a proper race on Saturday, right? So then it's not that big of a thing anymore. It's just something extra next to, for example, the endurance ride you did that day.
How did you manage to keep coaching Sam Oman? Because I know a lot of the pro teams is their son a rider. He's on Little Trek. Like if you go to UAE, I'm pretty sure they force you to be coached by one of their coaches. How did that work when he signed with them from Jumbo Visma?
Yeah, good question. It kind of depends on the team. I'm not sure. I'm actually not that sure if you are in UAE if you can't have like an external coach. I think it all depends, of course, who the external coach is. And as an external coach, you still need to stay in touch with the team. Because you kind of need to know, like, okay, what is the plan with a rider? But how does it? I mean, the preference of a rider is also pretty important here. I mean, if of course, if a team sees like the way someone's improving or is not improving or what we've been working on, and they think, hey, this is not a good idea, they could easily like demote me and say like, hey, you should work with a coach of the team. That could happen. Same goes for Taco, but I must say I had like 5 years ago when Eike Visbeek joined Intermarché. We were working together at the SEG Racing Academy. There was an under 23 development team, and I was manager there, and he was director sportif, and then he went to Intermarché, and with my coaching business, we moved together with him to Intermarché. So we did all bike fits, aero test. We trained a lot of riders with our whole team. So it started out a bit different. There I was really attached to the team, but over the years, also because Join grew, I could not train that many pro riders anymore, and I basically got stuck with Taco, and got stuck in a positive sense. We both got stuck with each other. So that's kind of a different approach. But they're still pretty. There are a lot of World Tour teams where there are some external coaches, and it kind of depends on the rider and what the goals are and that sort of stuff. And then I do believe it can work out pretty good. But it does require also some from the team, some extra effort, basically. Because it's not all communication is within your own team then. But then again, a team as Trek, for example, is that big, that many people. And for example, Sam has his own, like, his personal coach, his race coach in the team. So I stay in contact with him as well, and the head coach of the team.
Yeah, interesting. Sorry, maybe it wasn't UAE. I just know Jay Vine did have a coach domestically when he was with us in Australia. When he went to, it was Alpecin, he had to get rid of that coach. So yeah.
You guys know Jay Vine?
Yeah, Jay was on our team. Jay rode for so NERO comes from, essentially, we started a race team, a domestic race team in 2017, and then we joined us in 2019 when we were still a little domestic team, and then 2020 we went continental, and he did Suntour with us, and that year, and at the end of that year, which was of course the COVID lockdown year, he won the Zwift Academy, and then it was bye Jay. Yeah.
Whoa. But you guys already had from the start, like, this guy's something special?
Chris got his ass handed to him by Jay at a fondo. Literally,
he turned up. It's a crazy story. It's even like the videos are here on the channel, but it's like I was just doing this fondo down in Barrel, and I'm there kind of thinking I'm pretty king, I'm going pretty good, and just turning up to this amateur fondo, and it sort of comes to this like final selection of 3 or 4 of us, and this guy in this all black kit is on the front, just absolutely destroying us. And I can remember getting to the end of it and just going, who the hell are you? And Jay was he was racing on a very low level team. He'd kind of been doing some mountain biking stuff. but hadn't really succeeded too much at that. And then basically signed him that day, and he rode with us the next year, and the progression was kind of laugh. You could tell straight away, like if Jesse will say
you could see it.
Seemed...
He's literally his quads would grow every couple of months. He'd be like, "Oh, he's been training." Like he's just like responding at 3 times the rate of everyone else. It was just insane.
Yeah, and it's not like the whole pro peloton is made up of guys like that. It's there are some of these guys with that raw talent. Bauke Mollema, for example, in the Netherlands was one of them. He was like when he showed up in like racing. At like a really old bike, and they took him to a Spain stage race, like that was in 2006 or something, and he was like immediately just going for GC win with all kind of like Spanish pros, or Spanish top amateur level, and he still wore his helmet backwards. Was like, what is this? Who is that guy?
Who is the most talented rider you can think of?
Yeah, there are these guys like. For example, Dylan van Baarle is also like a guy like that, where immediately from the under 23, he did things, when there was a whole team pacing behind the car, he would just ride next to the team car for like 20 minutes, and he was fine. and Thomas Dekker, for example, when I was an under 23 rider myself. Thomas Dekker was like, he was amateur for 2 years or something at Rabobank, and we were riding like, I still know up until this day, we were riding Rundum die Henninger Turm, which is like May 1st. It was a big German classic, but it was also an under 23 race. And after like 80 Ks or something, so I was trying to stay in the front and attacking and everything. And it was like a bit up and down. And after 80 Ks, I kind of like slipped to the back of the peloton, and Thomas Dekker was there still wearing his rain jacket, and he was like, "Oh, is the race almost starting?" And I was like getting dropped, and I was so much dropped that I ended, by the way, in the pro race. So this was like in 2002 or something. So I was like, there was a helicopter above me, and there was like the first group of the pro riders coming. So I was then in the pro race, got dropped at the pro race, got in a bus, like the last race wagon of the pro race, and André Schmiel was there, and he saw me, and he really felt sorry for me, and he had some food left, and Thomas Dekker actually started at 80K and then won the race solo by like a couple of minutes. So he was basically just playing with the field, and that was before all the doping and all the shit show and whatever. There are once in a while guys, and I think Evenepoel, for example, is someone like that, and of course Pogacar is someone like that. But I've never been close to those guys, and especially not in their younger years. But like what you've experienced with Jay Vine, for example, I've seen with these kind of guys, and that's something special. And you could still, it's not necessarily that, like, for example, when I managed the under 23 team, a couple of them turned pro, and they're great pro riders, don't get me wrong there, but that really raw talent, where it basically doesn't matter what you do, you will improve anyway.
Jim, I know you've been involved in hour record attempts in the past. Could you just give us a brief background on who was doing it and how you were involved in some of the details on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, no problem. Well, the first attempt was with Thomas Dekker. So like the former bad kid in cycling, right? He got back from a doping suspension at Garmin, and in 2012, 13, I think the UCI rules about like what kind of gear you can use with an hour record changed, and it was like this whole sweep of pro riders trying to get it. And it was already a long time ago when I did this attempt, because I was actually asked by his management. I was coaching a lot of pro riders for the same management, like Dille Groenewegen, for instance. And we did back then a lot of aero tests. So on a track, basically, instead of like in a wind tunnel, measuring CDA values. And I was approached to kind of like get behind this record attempt that would last. Well, that was the thing. There was like this window of opportunity because I believe Brendel just took our record. So that was like in October, November 2014, and then we got behind it like in somewhere the same period. But anyway, we thought like, okay, we have a chance if we take Thomas Dekker on altitude. So because that wasn't done at that time. Merckx, of course, in Mexico City. But we thought, hey, there's this track in Mexico, Aguas Calientes, basically in the middle of nowhere. And there was like a Pan American Games there. And there was like some pretty bizarre times written over there. So we thought like, hey, there's this opportunity. But of course, Thomas Dekker was the track rider. So that was kind of a pickle.
Were you his like your involvement, were you just his personal coach or were you overseeing all the aspects of the attempt?
Actually, everything from
Right.
the bike to the position to the physiology, finding the proper location. Luckily, not everything regarding like the UCI and the regulations, because that's also a pain in the ass. That's what I did with the second attempt. I kind of led there the whole team on that side as well. But but of course I wasn't alone, but I was involved in actually everything. The only problem there was like Rowan Dennis got in between us. He did our record attempt in then January the same year, so 2015.
That's crazy
that
how
was
many
like-
there were.
It was actually quite entertaining because it was like the whole winter there were like record attempts. Nowadays it's not like that anymore because Filippo Ganna has like set a pretty bizarre record. But that was cool.
Just on like how you were the single person involved, or like maybe there were other people. You were the main guy because there was rumors that. Well, I guess people are asking Remco Evenepoel as probably the person that could potentially beat Ganna about, will he do it? What would that mean for his career and that kind of thing? How would that have changed now? Because this was, what, did you say 10 years ago that your attempt was? Like, how would you see the team stuff around that compared to when you were involved in the attempt between what it would be like for Remco to do it now? Assuming it wouldn't just be one guy sort of managing it all.
No. Well, there would be there's basically one guy in the lead. I mean, I believe like Bigham there was in the lead with the Wiggins attempt, for example. I mean, of course you have a team of some CDA or aerodynamic specialist, well, which is Bigham. But like the Kampenaerts attempt, that really came from out of the team. So Lotto back then, Lotto Soudal, managed that attempt. And they also went to Aguas Calientes. And of course, like, for example, I had someone in Mexico taking care of, like, literally everything there. Because you also need to talk with the Mexican Federation. They need to give a green light as well, next to the UCI and next to, like, your own federation. And, like, in UCI record attempt, it needs to, like, you need to adhere to all kind of, like, crazy rules instead of, like, from things like the backdrop where they do interviews, but also, like... the Tissot branding on the track, that's pretty well regulated. And of course, all that stuff basically, or handling media, that wasn't on my plate, luckily. So I wasn't doing it alone. But I do think, like, also because the record is that much, like, improved or that much faster now, that like doing how we did it with only like a window of about like 3 or 4 months or so, that's pretty nuts. But that was like, we knew like Thomas Dekker wasn't like the best cyclist for a record attempt ever. We knew we had to use that window of opportunity, basically.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. So why him? What was the reason for going?
Well, he was like, just before his doping suspension, he was the best time trialist of the Netherlands. Maybe not anymore in 2015, but he was like he was pretty aerodynamic. He was like really killing it in time trials, like in Tirreno Adriatico, which he once won, for example. But so we knew that, that in terms of time trialing, he would be pretty good. And he had some, like every rider in the Netherlands, some track experience, but he wasn't like a full-blown track rider, like Ganna, for example, or Wiggins. And that's a big difference. And that will also be, I wouldn't say a problem, because I think like in the case of Evenepoel, he has other qualities with which he can compensate, but not being a track rider is definitely not in his advantage for an hour record attempt.
Is it achievable for him? Like, I assume he would have thought about this. I mean, you talked about the Ganna time. He would therefore have some idea of the kind of power that he'd have to do for an hour. Do you think it's feasible for him? Because you'd have to argue he's basically maxed out. He would have to have pretty much maxed out his aerodynamic gains at this point, or maybe there's something else there.
Yeah. So I think like the Ghana record is now I think it was Grenchen, right? So Switzerland. That's a track at like 450 meters of altitude. And I think there's definitely room there. I mean, you wouldn't go up to La Paz at 3,000 meters or something. There, you come at a point that the aerodynamic gains of altitude don't weigh up for the deficit of your less oxygen consumption, basically. But at like 2,000 meters at Aguas Calientes, for example, that would be way better. The only problem there is for like, okay, you need to go there well in advance to Aguas Calientes. You probably need to prepare the track yourself or with your team, because it's not as well kept or maintained as like other tracks, or especially in Europe, because it's not that much used, basically. So I think like if Evenepoel would do something like that and also becoming like more of a track rider, it will cost him like, well, roughly somewhere, well, shortest timeline, maybe 4 or 5 months, that he really needs to get into this project. And I mean, where will he find the time for something like that when he has also other goals? So that's kind of the problem here.
How would his training change? Like, or maybe in a better case with Thomas Dekker, like how did his training change in the couple of months beforehand?
Well, you basically you use, of course, your aerobic engine. I mean, still most energy comes out of that aerobic engine. It's still an hour. So your aerobic capacity should be like enormous, but you're not training for a 6-hour classic race. So you kind of like over the months you lead up to this like really high intensity, threshold effort, where it's pretty brutal. Where like the longer endurance rides get like they never disappear, because that aerobic engine is really important, but they go a bit to the background, and more and more sessions are actually performed on the track. And that's a thing, of course, for a pro rider doing like this whole world tour, basically, circus. Yeah, where will you find the time to do enough hours on the track? And that's like doing those hours in the position on a track bike, without freewheeling, because that's something completely different, with a bit more power in the banks and a bit less on the straights. That's like that whole rhythm and keeping the proper line. That's pretty difficult, especially at that speed. So I think, in terms of like, even like in terms of like intensity or hours or the way he's currently like trained, there will be some fine tuning, but that's not the biggest change. But like riding on a track and doing your sessions, that's the.
I could imagine the volume would have dropped for someone doing that training. Like do you know how many hours you'd be back in 2015 that you'd be training for a road season? And like, what would the hours be for an hour record attempt?
Yeah, what we did, like especially in 2018, we did a new attempt with actually an amateur rider, but a track cyclist. Because we thought like, okay, bringing an amateur rider, Dion Beukebo. So he was national, he was competing on the Worlds for like track cycling. 4K pursuit, for example. But we did a new attempt, and then we had a sponsor behind us, and we could do it for a year. And we also took him to Arcos Calientes, of course, and we had a full year. But what we basically did, it was like periodization. So sometimes we had like blocks of 2 weeks where we diminished the hours, but we like did 2 track sessions on a day. And we did that in training camp. So we did that here in the Netherlands. We have 2 or actually 3 proper tracks, but we always use 2, like in Alkmaar and Amsterdam. And anyway, so there were like periods in his plan where the amount of hours were a bit less, but the intensity of the sessions were a bit higher, and we did like more on the track basically in those like 1 or 2 weeks, or often like 10 days actually. And then there were still blocks where we did a lot of just road cycling basically with more volume, and so it was kind of like on and off, and that went actually pretty well.
Is there any sessions that stand out particularly hard? I can imagine in like the weeks beforehand, you'd probably be throwing some I don't know if you're doing like hour record pace, but double the volume, like double the length, or like way faster. Any killer ones that come to mind?
Well, we did like, okay, so what I really learned from these attempts as well, that in the end, the whole problem of the record attempt is, well, in all like professional sports, basically, that there's then only that one race, that one day where you need to do it. So it's not like you can book the UCI and the TSO timekeeping, for example, and just say, hey, we want to improve this record somewhere this week. Just keep your cameras rolling and we'll be fine. That would be pretty cool, but it doesn't work like that. So there's this like well in advanced day, time, and there you need to do it. And yeah, there's so much pressure. And what we did with Thomas Dekker, for example, is that we did like this general rehearsal. We did it here in the Netherlands just before, so 3 weeks before the attempt, just before we went to Mexico. And we invited also the media and friends and family. So there were like, I don't know, maybe 50 to 100 spectators on the stands. And we did like a 45-minute record attempt on that pace, or well, on that power, because the pace was different because we did it at sea level. Just to, really familiarize yourself with, everything that comes along. But that was really... that was a pretty hard session because he was driving like this sports car, a Porsche or something, and he was like 2 hours after the record attempt, he had to stop at a gas station to fill up his tank, and he couldn't actually get out of the car because like he was so sore of like riding in that position for 45 minutes, and that got him thinking like, okay, this is something special.
Chris, you'll have good B-roll for this because all the hour record attempts, there's the full video on the UCI YouTube channel. I can see it. Dion Bokkebom, the whole thing's there.
In Dion's case, he had a crash on a track race like 1 month before the record attempt. So basically one of the last track races he did in Ireland or something. He had a massive crash and he couldn't walk for a couple of days, but then like it kind of disappeared. And then actually in like the last 1.5 weeks, so we were like 3.5 weeks before we were there in Mexico. And then in the last week, it kind of like resurfaced. And of course, that's the whole mental, physical game that's played there. Like with all the pressure on it. He had like really problems with his left hip. And actually in the attempt itself, he basically couldn't use his left leg. And that last week was so bizarre in terms of that you see what the pressure can actually do with someone. So that was really a pity because I wouldn't say that we would have like crushed the record or anything, but he would have ridden so much further. He was riding so much faster in some training sessions.
Did you do much heat preparation for those past hour record attempts? Because that's obviously in general training. It's been a trend. And I know Dan Bigham with Ganna's record, they were talking about how they were eating buckets of ice before the attempt to pre-cool. Was that a thing back then, or is that more recent?
Not that much. No, in 2018, we didn't know what we know now about like doing those heat sessions. It was because it was in Mexico, and it was in Mexico in September. And we were actually using the heat because like with the proper heat, you get like the air resistance a bit down as well.
So could you just explain that for people that don't understand that? What does that mean? You heat the track or something?
No, well, so that especially there in Arcos Calientes, there's this kind of like the roof is like some kind of sail, and the sun is on it like the whole day. So during the day, the track really heats up there. So it gets around like 30 degrees Celsius. And the thing is, of course, you don't want it to be too hot for a rider, but the heat is also like helping in like, dropping like the air pressure, basically. So having less air resistance. So we kind of like use that, or we try to use it in our advantage for like, setting the time of the day, because you're kind of like free in that regards. So we did it like in the middle of the day, like at 2 or something, because then the track was nicely heated up. And but a good thing, like what I'm currently doing with like riders like Sam Omer, for example, a World Tour climber for track. We do so much heat sessions nowadays. It's like really a big part of a training plan. But back in 2018, well, for example, it was more about ketones back then. That was like the new thing.
Wow, yeah. Remember the old ketones? Okay.
Yeah, you still remember them? So that came around like in 2017 or 2018 or something. But anyway, I'm pretty sure that in 10 years from now, we will still be doing heat sessions. And with ketones, back then already, we were kind of like, okay, there are some studies, but I don't really see it in the data. What are we looking at? We were kind of like, how do we need to use it? How important is it? But with heat sessions, it's completely different.
How were you using them back in the day? Because I know I think the jury's still out, and there's potentially a recovery benefit to using them, but not probably actively during exercise. How were you doing it back then?
Yeah, so we were basically, we were using it during. So during the attempt, and also we were trying it out, like, okay, how is your stomach going to react? How do you feel with it? But the recovery thing that came along in, I don't know, 2000, 2001 or something. I think especially at Jumbo-Visma, like Wout van Aert taking it after cyclocross races, for example. That wasn't a thing yet in 2018. In 2018, we still thought you had to take it like during a race, or during a really high effort. And especially, of course, our record attempt on that like high effort, if the body kind of like doesn't get it yet, that the carbs storage is being emptied a bit, that we might get an extra gain from like stuff like ketones. But to be totally honest there, I mean, we didn't see it in the... I mean, it was like, in the case of Dion, it wasn't like... we didn't see any negative effects of it. So we were kind of on the side, like... And there were some studies by Peter Hespel, for example, from KU Leuven, I believe, that showed some beneficial gains. So that's like, okay, let's then do it.
In hindsight, it wasn't a negative, but it was sort of like, well, we can't really tell if it's doing anything. Yeah. Okay. Any other supplements you were using back then?
Well, caffeine, B-carb.
Yeah.
And with B-carb, we really had to fine tune, because with B-carb, it's really tempting to go too fast in the beginning. But also for pro riders in road races, B-carb is a great supplement, but you kind of like, you don't have like that natural limit where you go like full gas for like 1 or 2 minutes, and then you kind of like hit the ceiling, but that ceiling isn't there, and that's kind of crazy. But of course, that ceiling is there. It's just a bit higher. So you really need to, kind of like get acquainted with a supplement like B-carb to actually know what you're doing. But yeah, B-carb, caffeine.
Any idea what the caffeine loading protocol would have been before the hour record?
I believe like Dion was a pretty big guy. He was like 87 kilos or something. The guy's like more than 2 meters. And I think it was roughly somewhere around like 300, 350 milligrams.
Oh.
Something like that.
Huh. I'm a bit disappointed.
Yeah, you wanted more?
I reckon Jesse Core runs more at a Saturday afternoon lunch ride, to be honest.
Yeah, you do?
You know, do that every 45 minutes.
You know that the caffeine has like half-time value of like 6 hours or something.
That's all right.
Oh, yeah,
Finish the race,
Okay.
okay. That's
Sleep
the fun.
when you
The drive home's the best bit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we had this caffeine supplements in a team that I was racing in, and at a certain point the guy said like, well, I don't believe there's really caffeine in it, and it there was like 200 caffeine in a gel or something, 200 milligrams of caffeine. But the problem is, of course, if you're in a race, if you're actually doing something, often you don't really notice, you know. So he took 3. And we were still on the bus, and he started sweating. And was like, so, yeah. And of course, I mean, at a certain point, you get some kind of resistance to it. So actually, the best way of using a supplement like caffeine is also planning some depletion. But that's a hard part for a lot of people to get rid of coffee, for example.
Yeah, and the other thing I was just going to ask, and we probably covered that really in terms of that record, things that was what you would have changed, or even what you thought was important then, but it turned out not to be as is integral, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, so much, basically, and that's the thing with these, with these kind of like these bigger projects, and I did a couple of those, not only like our records, but also like managing a development team, for example. But there's also always like so much that in hindsight you would have done differently, and especially like, for example, because the one with Thomas Dekker, for example, the window that we had of only like 3 or 4 months, and then his attempt was like pretty solid, as in he wasn't riding proper lines, he didn't have the track experience, we only had that small window, but in the end, like he delivered, and he basically did better than the Brendel attempt that was like in October. Our only problem was that Rowan Dennis came in between. And I mean, Rowan Dennis back then, well, and then for a long time after, by the way, but he was a pretty decent track rider and time trialist, and Thomas Dekker wasn't nowhere near his level. And still, we came quite close. So that was actually quite a successful, if you can say so, attempt. But with Dion, we did so much right, and in the end, we did basically so much wrong, because when he crashed like 1 month prior to his record attempt, we just should have had a call with the UCI and postponed the whole attempt and doing it differently. But then you have, of course, you know, you have your sponsor, you have like the runway of the money, you have so much other obligations as well. But in hindsight, I should have like put my foot down and said like, okay, we are not doing this in 4 weeks from now, and that's still pretty unfortunate. So that was a big learning point, that sometimes you really need to follow, especially in these kind of projects, your instincts or your guts. Like, okay, this is not going the right way. Let's really kind of like reset and do things better, you know. Let's try it again. Like, for example, one thing we did with Dion, because we started like 1 hour in advance, and it was already this training plan, and we were training really structured. But at a certain point, I sensed that he was missing the motivation, and then we incorporated like something that we called like Wicked Wednesday. So every Wednesday he had to do like this big endurance ride, but it was something that he wanted to do like once in his career. For example, like doing this big 250k loop around like a big lake in the Netherlands, or doing like a 300k motor-paced ride, all kind of like really crazy endurance ride where it wasn't about structure at all. but really to have like every week have something that, of course, bring big gains in terms of like endurance, but also it's something that he was really like, motivated for, or kind of like got him out of his comfort zone. And that worked really well.
Do you still ride much, Jim?
Well, I'm actually into running a lot lately.
Oh, no.
But,
one of those. Oh, he's gone.
Oh, shit, he's gone. No, well, I did a Swift race yesterday, still recovering. So I still ride my bike like once or twice a week.
What bike do you have?
Well, I have two road bikes, and a beach bike. So I still have a Venge, Specialized Venge.
Which generation?
Best bike ever. Yeah, so that's the last one. Yeah, this one. So that's like 2020. Yeah, so the first generation was really stiff. That was like the bike designed for Cavendish. That's not designed for an amateur rider. You couldn't turn a corner with it. But then the Venge basically became a better bike than the Tarmac. I think like my version is like, that's the last one, so 2020. And actually Specialized tells me all the time, don't sell it. And I know there are people at Specialized that actually buying it back because it's just a great bike. I do think that that a lot what's currently in the Tarmac is basically what the Venge was. You know, they did that whole name change. But so that's, and I got like a one stay with a SRAM. So when I do like a local race here, in the Netherlands, you have a lot of like these club races. When I do them in the summertime, I always take this one.
Do you tubes or tubeless?
Tubeless.
Oh, okay.
And I got a Tarmac, the SL7, because I do need
full Specialized fanboy. Okay,
yeah, full Specialized fanboy. Yeah, okay. Because if there are some hills, I can't show up with my Venge. Basically, I need two blades in front. And I got a beach bike, which is big here, or kind of big here in the Netherlands.
You mean like do you mean a beach cruiser or a beach racing bike?
A beach racing bike.
Oh, nice.
So it's basically it's a mountain bike, but then with a fixed front fork, and big rims, big balloon tires. Because we have here like 250k of like beach where you can just endlessly ride your bike on.
I think it's beach racing season right now, isn't it? I've seen a bit of content from it.
So I used to do a lot of races. I was actually in a sponsored beach race team. Might sound a bit silly for you guys, but that's the thing. And that was the best, by the way, because the only problem with beach racing is that you need to clean your bike all the time, and I'm not that good at that, to be honest. So then you can just turn up, take your bike, and then just give it back at the end of the race. Sorry, guys.
What of the equipment changes do you think's affected pro cycling the most? Is it the change to disc, or is there something else that you think had a big impact?
There are a lot of things. So for example, in that period, electronic shifting really came in the pro peloton, which was like, especially when you're like all like full of lactate on top of a hill, and then, for example, shift towards your big blade in front with just the press of a button. That was, especially when it was cold, that was already a big advantage. And my like strong point, I didn't have a lot of strong points, but if there were, it was like in the classic season when it was a bit colder. That I already felt that was a big advantage. The tires getting bigger and bigger, but that isn't finished yet, in my opinion. We're still experiencing that. And yeah, with the disc brakes, maybe in terms of like riding within the peloton. Like, for example, if we were riding, we rode carbon, we were riding full carbon rims. And when it was wet, it basically didn't work. But the thing was, everyone knew. So you knew that the guy in front couldn't brake and the guy behind you couldn't brake as well. And we are doing this 10K descent. No one can brake. Let's all just, use a bit of sense here. Now with disc brakes, you can sprint towards a corner with like 65k an hour, and then at the last moment, just bypass everyone, shortcut everyone in the inner corner, and then just hope for the best. With rim brakes, that wasn't possible, you know. So the way of racing and riding, especially also in the classics with disc brakes, I believe that's the bigger change.
For the better or for worse in terms of safety, do you think?
Good question. It's different. And because, I mean, to be totally honest here, riding a descent in the rain with carbon rims, I mean, my kids definitely, if the sport stays like this, my kids won't go on cycling. They're not allowed to, you know. I mean, I still know that that was also pretty terrifying. So that we got rid of that is plus point. But the way how aggressively you can brake right now, especially within a peloton with disc brakes, that's also not necessarily always a plus.
Well, I remember when the transition to disc was first happening, and the people were scared that you would get cut if you crashed. I mean, people would like hold sausages to the disc road, or it was the actual danger of crashing on a disc brake. That never really seemed to eventualize into anything.
No, but it was because Campiolo didn't have a disc brake back then, right? And Campiolo was a pretty big influence on the UCI, because the UCI is still run by old Italian people. So they had to wait another year. I don't think that was really a reason back then.
Yeah, from having spectating racing, that's a good question. I guess to say, like, has it gotten more danger? Are there more crashes? Would be the first. Like, if there's less crashes, I'd have to say it's a good thing. It's not more dangerous. I actually, well, maybe I'll ask you, because you've been around the sport much longer than I have. Like, is cycling more dangerous? Do you think there's more crashes now?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's more. There's more. It goes faster. Well, that's the whole thing right now. Okay, with handlebar width, with banning basically the 10 sprocket, right, of SRAM, or the gears basically. So the UCI tries to slow the peloton down, right? That's the whole idea. I'm not sure if they're taking the right approach there. I think the courses itself, we're still organizing a Tour de France like it's 1952. Like, we go through all these old villages, and of course it looks nice on camera, but it doesn't make sense with all the road furniture, with the speed that, well, it almost doubled. Well, it probably doubled since 1952, but like over the past couple of years, there are a lot of stats around it as well that hold that up. Like, every year the peloton goes faster, and the courses the need to be safer, and especially for example, the last 5 or 10Ks, we're still finishing bunch sprints within a city center. I mean, I get it, looks nice, but really, if we're really into like making this sport safer, then let's stop with that craziness. Instead of handlebar width, for example. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. And there's so much now. I mean, there's luckily now there's this B-post, road furniture, like these full, like, big balloons that they put around like cones and stuff like that. Why isn't that like, in every race, like, required? Sometimes you still see like those fences in the last kilometer, like, in Poland, like 5 years ago, that was really ridiculous. But sometimes you still see it maybe not the Tour, but at some pretty decent big pro races, you see fences that you're like, you don't want to get too close to that. People hanging over the barriers, why isn't there like some kind of safe zone in between? Like, because people do gonna hang over the barriers, so why isn't there then maybe an extra barrier? I mean, these are all the simple stuff, right? I'm not working for the UCI, or I'm not being a race organizer.
I mean, well, you're answering it essentially, just asking, do you think it's more dangerous? And everyone's going faster. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it is.
I think it is, and I hate the sport for that. By the way, not for going faster, but for being so dangerous.
Yeah. Do you think that's just mostly because obviously the aerodynamics and stuff makes a difference in the fitness of the riders? I guess it doesn't matter why, right? If they're going faster, I always thought, like the race is going faster because there's more money. The sport's more serious than it was 50 years ago, so the stakes are higher, right? Isn't that why the racing is faster?
As well, yeah, of course. That helps. I mean, the stakes are higher, therefore, like the circumstances that riders create for themselves in terms of training, eating properly, training camps, staffing, you name it. Even traveling. Hotels, bring their own mattresses, everything improved. So yeah, human performance improved. Yeah, because more money got in. That's a good thing. And that's like, I think that's something you can't be against that, right? That would be like, we're not, and sometimes it feels like cycling tries to go back in time. And I don't think that is a way of making something safer or better. I think you do need that everything improves all the time, year over year. Yeah, that's basically mankind. That's nature. Now let's see what we can do about it. That just makes it a bit safer. Why are all the time trials gone, for example? I would love more time trials. Time trials are pretty safe.
You mean like time trial events, like the Chronos de Nations or whatever it's called, like things like that?
Well, it used to be like on the Olympics, right? 100K team time trial with 4 guys. How cool is that? But even just time trials in the Grand Tours, that's diminished to like often a prologue and one time trial of 20K or something. The big time trials are gone.
It must be a TV ratings thing, I imagine. I mean, not being someone who does normally enjoy watching a time trial, I don't agree with it, but I would argue that's probably the rationale or the answer.
Yeah, but it can be televised better. Why? If I'm looking at Flanders, then when Wout van Aert is on top of like the Wolvenberg, I want to know his exact time over that Strava segment and how it holds up to like previous years, and what the other rider, did he gain anything compared to other riders? That kind of information. People often then make the comparison with Formula One. I'm not gonna going there, but I mean, I think if we care about television ratings, the sport can be so much more entertaining than what it often is. Yeah,
don't start me on this. I was trialing those Oakley Vanguards during the week, and I was thinking about this. I'm like, this is the freaking future. I've got these camera glasses on. I mean, we know how pros think about adding any weight to their bike or that sort of stuff. Obviously we'd only be a generation or two away from being able to have some sort of Wi-Fi or SIM card or 4G connection in these sunglasses. You issue that, and then you've got access. Imagine having access to 150 riders' sunglasses at the director's board, and you're in there, and we go, oh, let's cross to Wout van Aert as he hits the bottom of the Kalberg. Bang. We're there. I mean, that, like, yeah.
Yeah, I actually tried to together with 2 friends of mine. We were kind of like fed up with like the data in for example, the Tour de France and how it was broadcasted, and what you saw like instant power, for example. You still see it sometimes in the Giro, for example. You see, Pogacar is now doing 280, 420, 360. It's like, what am I looking at? And the thing was like, especially back then, they had to have like a truck at the starting line. They had to have a helicopter for transmission, and even an airplane that was circling to get that signal across. And we thought like it can be like way easier with just like on a mobile network, and then you don't always have a data connection. But the times that you do, you actually often don't want to have like instant power. You just want to, like, when there is a connection, just fill in the data, and then we know what someone wrote up, like the Telegraph, for example, when he's on the top. And we kind of like devised a system that was called road power. And we also had like this functionality that you could see someone's like W prime. So his critical power in his W prime. And then you could like make an estimation like live when, the whole anaerobic capacity was like when the tank was emptied. And then if someone would drop, and then have that as a second screen. Try to sell it to races first, and then also at a couple of teams, and then to use it in a team car. But then the UCI came in between and said like, you're not allowed to have like live data in a team car.
In terms of like history in the sport, because you've been in it quite a while and you're still involved in the World Tour. We've talked about in the past how it's a bit funny in the promotion of a clean sport, and it's a new way of doing things and blah, blah, blah. And yet you go through the team stuff for most of the teams, and there's all these, not just riders that were caught doping, but team managers of teams that were doping, sports positions of doping teams that are still involved with current pro teams. Like, do you have an opinion on that? Is that just maybe like, firstly, why are they still involved? Can we not get other people to do that? And secondly, does that irritate you as someone who's like interested in clean sport?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely am. The fact that someone doped 20 years ago and is now in pro cycling, that's maybe not the problem. The problem is that there's still guys who act like they weren't involved in any kind of like big doping network and administrating it and like doing all the planning and the logistics and setting young guys, like 20, 22-year-old guys, setting them on doping programs, not knowing anything about the sport and still being really active in the sport, like that all never happened. That really gets me going. I mean, but is there a place for guys like Jonathan Walters, for example? Yeah, for sure. There is. Actually, and there are more of these, guys that actually know, hey, what we did back then, that was wrong, and we learned from it, and now we try to prevent. Actually think we need those people to prevent the new generation of making the same mistakes,
Oh, maybe I'll just ask you straight up, like, when you see the performance of like Pogacar and you look at these watts per kilo estimates that come out, some maybe not so accurate, some are, I think Vingegaard said in the past, some of the numbers estimates he's seen are fairly accurate or close. Does it raise an eyebrow for you? And if it doesn't, is there a watts per kilo number for certain duration that would? Or do you not really look at it? Is it not sort of relevant?
Well, I look at powers. But I think it's very dangerous. You had that French guy. He was kind of a lunatic that said like, for certain powers, then it's like extraterrestrial and it's impossible and it has to be doping. And honestly, I think that's really dangerous to go there. That's kind of like, so we're into a sport where we try to maximize human performance, but when it goes really fast, we're like, no, that can't be possible. That's then what actually are we doing? So,
sorry, they were saying that about Froome's numbers back in the day. I'm like, Jay Vine was beating this when he was coming off his mountain bike 6 years ago. Yeah.
So, and actually Lance Armstrong, same thing. Based on the powers of Lance Armstrong, you couldn't suspect him of doping. His power numbers weren't that, like, especially if you compare it to nowadays, weren't that special. So, based on power numbers, it's ridiculous to do so. And it's actually, it makes a lot of sense that in any kind of, we always look to, I know you, I will try to make it short, but we always we think about like, if we look at sports or we look at human performance, we think of a normal distribution, like an inverted U, right? Where like the same as people with brown hair or color of the eyes, there's a normal distribution, the average is like right in the middle where most people are. But with human performance or with cycling performance specifically, it doesn't work like that. It's basically, there's this power of law. There's this, if you do everything right in the course of complete lifespan of Pogacar, being born in the right circumstances with the right genetics and then having the right training and having a built team around you, then of such a young age, just it all adds up. Basically, never crash, for example, or never crash with severe consequences. So you can keep improving year after year. That's kind of like a power of law, and then that's an attribute of a complex system. And that actually, and you see that in a lot of sports, that the whole bunch is somewhere here in the beginning, and then there's these extreme outliers all the way over there. Like a Pogacar or a Vingegaard. And in sports, that totally makes sense because there's not that normal distribution.
I guess the pushback would be, but there would be a number, right? If I told you did 8 watts per kilo for 45 minutes, you'd go...
At this moment in time, I would be highly surprised. But if we would like play back this recording in 50 years from now, I mean, where will the 100-meter sprint ever go? Like there were talks like 20 years ago or something that it could never go surpass a certain. I don't know the exact time limit, but it was like that was biomechanically impossible. And now like the complete final does that, of an Olympics. So of course there's this asymptote. Do you call it like that in English? It's so so the steps will be smaller and smaller, or basically there will be probably maybe a decade where it's like kind of like stops. Or now if you look, for example, to the era of Tom Dumoulin and Geraint Thomas, that wasn't that spectacular, the power that they delivered, but they could still win a Grand Tour. And maybe we will have the same in 10 years from now. And in 10 years after that, we will see an enormous increase again.
Thank you so much for your time, Jim. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see everyone real soon.